Hello, friends, and welcome back. Today we're talking about seeing God in nature. And our old Christian mystical friends are going to show us how to use this small stone or any other natural object to see God. Don't worry, this is actually the exact opposite of idolatry. We're talking about a universal spiritual experience that isn't just a part of Christian mysticism, it's so deeply ingrained in all human beings that it might be the most primal, the most instinctual form of what we call spirituality. The old Christian mystical term for what we're talking about is the contemplation of nature, or seeing the Creator in and through and beyond creation. Today, we'll talk about how human beings have always seen the divine in nature, and we'll talk about the unique way that the old Christian mystics saw God in nature. Then, based on their teachings, we'll look at two ways to practice seeing God in nature that you can start doing today. For more about the scriptural and theological roots of today's video, make sure you check out last week's video on John 1 through 5, where John the evangelist opens our spiritual eyes to Christ in all things as the divine Logos. Now, seeing God in creation for yourself, or what the mystics call the contemplation of nature. The history of seeing the divine in nature goes back to well before we have any written records or traditions. The order of the natural world, the cycle of day and night, the seasons, the stars, that's the foundation for almost all early spirituality and religious practice. We can still see the signs of early humanity's deep spiritual connection to nature at sites like Stonehenge or the Egyptian and Mayan pyramids. These ancient buildings are always oriented to the stars or to the equinoxes and the solstices, showing that our ancestors carefully observed natural cycles and had a powerful spiritual connection to the world around them. When we get into time periods with more surviving artifacts and literature, we can see that the early religions worshipped the gods by imitating the seasons. In early Canaanite religion, for example, fertility cults like the worship of Baal and Asherah used sexual rites to inspire the gods of nature to continue providing rain and sunshine at the proper time. Even complex religious systems like Greek mythology can trace their origins back to the observation of constellations, the elements, and the seasonal changes of the natural world. In the Bible, the worship of Yahweh is based more on God's particular relationship with the descendants of Abraham. So Israel's religion was more about history than it was about nature. And the Bible strongly warns against the worship of nature and nature gods. But early worship of Yahweh, the Creator, was still inspired by the order and beauty of creation. Nehemiah 9:6 says, "You alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven worship you." And even in the New Testament, which is always more focused on the Christ event and on social issues, Paul speaks of the order and beauty in creation as the foundation of human spirituality and of our knowledge of God. Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." I looked and looked for one source for this video, but I couldn't find it. It might have been in a Stephen Charleston book, but I checked mine and I couldn't find this quote. But I remember somewhere reading about a Lakota man who was so overcome by the beauty and order of nature that he picked up a small stone just like this one and cried out, "Who made you?" And a lot of us, no matter how skeptical and materialistically minded we are, we still catch our breath at a sunset or a colorful bird or a clear sky full of stars. There's something about the natural world that speaks powerfully to the human soul. The beauty and the order around us pull us toward the mystery, and they always have. But despite all that, if you're like me, you might be surprised to find out that not all Christian mystics in history were into seeing God in nature. Plato was a major influence on some of the early mystics, and some of them were Platonic dualists who believed that the natural world was corrupt and that we should reject material reality as a distraction from spiritual reality. On top of that, there has always been a strong apocalyptic current in Christian thinking from the beginning. Along with other Christians, some Christian mystics believed that the material world is destined for destruction at the return of Christ. All they saw in nature was the old world that would burn up and pass away. And then there were mystics who were strongly against the contemplation of nature because they saw natural philosophy as the first step toward idolatry. They thought that contemplating and imitating nature led the pagans to worship idols with their bloody sacrifices and their sexual rituals. And they thought that studying the stars led the Greeks to worship their pantheon of strange false gods. So their perspective on nature also comes from Romans 1, where Paul says they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a natural human being and birds and animals and reptiles. If contemplating nature leads to idolatry and forgetting the Creator, it's probably safer to just leave nature outside and focus on scripture and prayer and righteousness and church and fighting against sin. That attitude toward nature in some of the early mystics is disappointing to me. I understand their warnings, but seeing God in nature is such an important, instinctual part of my own spirituality, and I expected more, at least from the men and women who left the city for the wilderness and lived their whole lives in meditation and contemplation surrounded by natural beauty. But even desert hermits in the Christian tradition often had a negative view of the natural world. Still, there are plenty of early and medieval Christian mystics who had what's called a sacramental understanding of nature. And these are the spiritual writers that resonate the most with me. A sacrament is a symbol that points the soul to a spiritual reality. The act of baptism points to our death and rebirth in Christ. The Eucharist points to Christ's sacrifice for our forgiveness and to Christ's presence literally with and in us. Even a church building with its steeple or spires is a sacred space that points to the dwelling place of God in heaven. A sacramental understanding of nature sees the whole created order as a sacrament. All of material reality points to spiritual reality in the same way that the masterpiece points to the artist, the maker, the creator. Augustine warns about getting stuck worshiping the natural world, as the Greeks did. But he also writes about looking at nature and seeing its beauty and order, and then perceiving the mystery that gives being and unites all things. The bottom line here is that Christians don't have to despise or fear creation. Nature is the handiwork of the God we love. It's the expression of his skill and power and intelligence and love and glory. It's the place where the divine Logos was embodied and incarnated. It's the world that God loves so much that he died to save it. When Christ returns, according to the New Testament, the heavens and the earth and every creature and all things will not be annihilated, but will be resurrected and made new for eternity. So creation is to be treated with the respect that its creator's love demands. The spiritual Christian looks with awe and wonder at nature, and then looks through nature and beyond it to glimpse the designer, the creator, the giver of life, the sustainer of all. Bar Hebraeus tells us that the beauty and order of creation lead us directly to the love of God. The sunrise, the wanderings of the moon, the wind in its currents, the changing seasons, the clouds and their rain, the abundance of the earth and sea, the wonderful creatures in their endless kinds. It is impossible to keep silence, but to thank God properly for all these things is beyond our power. Yet he is so good as to not expect any reward from us. It is sufficient for him that we see his works and love him. Now, of course, a romantic view of the beauty and order in creation can lead us to the love of the Creator. But if you spend any time looking at nature, you know that that's not all that nature is. What about the violence and the pain and the hunger and the fear that exist in nature? Seeing nature as a sacrament is kind of bittersweet. We see all things as the gift of God. Nature's beauty reveals God's goodness, but nature's incompleteness also shows us that the created world depends on its creator to save and sustain and heal it. Creation's dependence on its creator leads to praise and wonder and thanks to the one on whom all things depend, but it also leads to sorrow and lament and petition. The world is fragile. Our fellow creatures are fragile. They're passing. They're groaning in pain. They're in need of sustenance and salvation and renewal and recreation and permanence. For the Christian mystic, natural beauty and order point to the skill and the love of the Creator. And creation's weakness and mortality point to every creature's need for their Creator. So, for the spiritual person, all of nature, both bright and dark, is a sacrament. So, how do we see God? Through the sacrament of creation. In the mystical tradition, there are two basic ways to see through and beyond nature to God. There's a negative or apophatic practice, and then there's a passive, non dual, contemplative, more positive practice. For both of these practices, let's use this small stone that I've been fidgeting with the whole time as our touch point for nature. But you can use anything from a sky full of stars to a single grain of sand. With openness and patience and concentration and stillness in your soul, any created thing is part of the sacrament that points you to its maker. We will run through both practices, but instructions for both of them will be in the first pinned comment below this video if you'd like to copy those and use them later. So first, the negative or apophatic practice. The negative practice of seeing God in nature comes from more esoteric writers like John Scotus Eriugena, and it concentrates the mind and the heart on God by seeing what nature is not, and therefore, by process of elimination, what God is. So to do this one, sit still with the stone in your hand or in the presence of whatever nature you're contemplating. Feel its weight, its texture, its temperature. See its color and its shape. Appreciate its beauty. Then meditate on how God is not like this stone. This stone had an origin. God has no origin. He is eternal. This stone was once a part of something bigger. God doesn't break apart into pieces. He is forever whole and complete in himself. This stone is made of atoms and molecules. God is uncreated, uncomposite spirit. This stone is subject to all the physical laws of the universe, but God is the sustainer of the universe and all its laws. This stone can be known by my senses. I can see it, I can touch it, I can smell it, I can taste it, I can hear it, I can measure it, I can compare it to other stones and other objects and other creatures. But God is beyond my senses. God is impossible to measure. God transcends all categories with no one and nothing to compare to. The stone has a number. There's just one. God is one, but he is also infinite and beyond number. The stone has a single location in relation to all other things. God is everywhere, in and through and beyond all things. This stone cannot move of its own power. But God is powerful and completely free to act and to move in ways that I cannot imagine. The stone has mass, but what is the mass of God? This stone reflects the light so that I can see it. But God is the source of his own light, invisible to my human eyes, but God is still the spiritual light in all created things. This stone is durable, but it cannot last forever. God is not subject to forces of destruction or decay. Like all other material things, this stone exists from moment to moment in the love of God. But God is the love that sustains all creatures from moment to moment. That's 12 things right there, but you can practice this kind of negative contemplation with any natural object for as long as you want. It will remind you of who God is in very powerful ways. And it can be more mystical than what we usually do, which is comparing God positively with things. You know, God is like the sun, God is like a father. Because by seeing what God is not, we're immediately in contact with the divine mystery. Idolatry is taking something like a stone and turning it into God in our minds and hearts. Taking a stone like this and seeing all the ways that this stone is not God is like the exact opposite of idolatry. And if you have kids like I do, and you'd like to communicate something of the mystery of God to them, this negative contemplation practice, I think, would work. Just get a rock from outside and put it on the table and spend the afternoon coming up with ways that the rock is not like God. And right there, whether they know it or not, you're creating little Christian mystics. The other practice you can do to see God in and through and beyond nature is the basic passive contemplation of nature. The positive contemplation of nature is more like a calm, observant, non judgmental mindfulness meditation in response to the natural world around you. First, sit still and open your senses to the natural world around you. In this case, we'll open our senses to this stone. Let go of all thoughts and feelings of judgment or evaluation. Don't judge the stone as big or small, beautiful or ugly. Just look at it. It's a real object. It's right here. Your opinion of it doesn't really matter. Now, let go of any fears associated with the object that you're contemplating. I guess in this case, don't think about the damage that the stone could do to you. But if you're looking at like an insect, try to see it without worrying about its bite or its sting. Just let it be itself without thinking about how it could harm or benefit you. And let go of your desire to use or consume or own whatever it is that you're contemplating. Don't see the stone as a tool or as an object that belongs to you or has any use to you at all. The stone just exists to be itself. Now, see the world, this stone, with a simple love and respect for the kinship of all of God's creatures. The same God who made me made this stone, which means this stone is my brother. Now, try to see each creature in its own essence instead of how it relates to you. Try to see the stone for itself instead of seeing it through how it makes you feel. See what each creature wants, loves, fears, and holds sacred. See their way upon the earth. What is this stone doing? What does it want? What is its future? Don't assume that you know. Watch, listen, observe, pay attention. And if you can do that with a quiet openness, then you might just see the interconnectedness of all beings, because there is one life and one light in all things, one love that holds all things together. The same God who made you and gives you life made this stone and sustains its existence from moment to moment in love. If you can see that, then you'll be able to see how the same Christ that is in you is the same Christ that is in every other creature. But you'll also be able to see how Christ lives and plays in other creatures in their own way. So, what is Christ doing, and how is Christ alive in this stone? If you get a glimpse of it, or you just make room for that idea, then you can join all creatures in the worship of our life and light, who is Christ. Join in with the stone and with the birds and the trees and the sun and the sky and the ants and the mosquitoes to worship the God who is all and is in all. Again, this is the opposite of idolatry. We're not turning this stone into a god. We're not saying that this stone is sacred and every other stone is not sacred. We're stopping to see and understand the presence and the activity of God in the life of this one stone, so that we can find a deeper awareness and appreciation of God's presence and activity in all things, including in ourselves. We go from the particular to the universal. For some of us, the contemplation of nature comes very naturally. For others, it's a bit of a struggle. But if you slow down and practice seeing God in the world around you, you might be surprised at how deep your mystical experience of your Creator can become. So get outside and find some small bit of nature to contemplate until you can see the light and life of Christ in all things, including yourself, until Christ is formed in us.